Hey everyone, it's Evelyn. Today we're going to go over my top 10 foliage to add to bouquets through the course of the season, which for me is around the end of March to sometime in November usually. Now, I'm going to do a reminder that on the 29th of January, I'm going to do my first ever Flower Farm Q&A, and I will answer questions that have been in any of the videos for the month of January. So this is the third video of the month. I've got 8 questions that I will be answering already. If you have any additional questions you want answered in the Q&A, don't forget to put them down in the comments section below. So let's get on with the video. First up, I'm going to talk about some spring foliage that I use in my bouquets, and they're not on my property. We have the ability, the access to, luckily, to go and cut these when we need them, and it's not something I prefer to do. Oh, I keep getting a piece of hair in my mouth. It's not something I prefer to do because that means you got to get in your car, drive to where they are, cut them, and bring them back. That's extra time. However, the first one, sand cherry, which I'll put up here, is very important to me at the end of, did I say March? End of April. End of April? Yeah, end of April, not March. And, oh, look who's here. You haven't seen Esri for a couple of videos because she actually had, you can still see it. See how swollen her ear is? She broke a blood vessel in her ear and was sort of not feeling very good for a few weeks, so she wasn't coming to harass me. She was kind of just lying in a little corner by herself. Swelling's gone way down. You should have seen what it looked like when she did it. It was just like monstrous ear and so red, but doesn't hurt her anymore, and she's feeling very frisky again. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. Okay, so, and the very first thing that blooms for me is, and of course now she's going to be wanting to get in the way completely. Let me push my chair back a bit so she can get up a bit better. There you go. The very first one that blooms for me is my camellia bush. And there's nothing much, if anything, to pair it with at that time of year. I don't have anything to pair with the camellia bush. So to be able to go and get the sand cherry branches is really, really good, because although the camellia has its own beautiful glossy green leaves, the sand cherry not only adds that beautiful deep burgundy brown tone to a bouquet, but also it adds cherry blossoms for a secondary flower. But mainly I'm cutting it for the burgundy leaves, less so the cherry blossoms, but the cherry blossoms of course add quite a bit on their own. Now, I can also use the sand cherries after the camellias. As you can see in this bouquet here, I've got it paired with a Bartzella Itoh peony, which is the yellow blossom, red rhododendrons, there's a purple allium tucked in the back, my kale leaves, and some Princeton gold maple leaves in there as well. And so it adds itself another depth of color, quite a deep dark color in this bouquet as a nice contrast to that very pale, vibrant yellow that's in there. So the second foliage that we also get from off the property is the long-needled Ponderosa pine. Now it's, because of the way the pine tree grows, it's sort of from the tree that we have access to, it doesn't have a lot of needles along its branch, only on the end, like the previous year's growth, it almost seems like, and they kind of curl up. So you can't get really long stems of it, so they're quite short, so they have to stay down low. When we go and cut the sand cherry branches, we cut the pine branches at the same time. And the good thing about the pine branches is they last a long time, so you can cut a lot and use it over the course of 1 or 2 weeks and not worry about it not lasting in a bouquet. But they are short, so you can't use them that much in a bouquet. So as you can see here in this one, here's another spring bouquet that has a Bartzella peony, another peony down lower, which is the pale pink one. My kale leaves, another large allium, some of the sand cherry branches. It's got some snowberry branches up off to the side, and then tucked down low, you can see the spike of the pine needles. And what I absolutely love about it in a bouquet is that intense texture that those needles create. And they're not sharp, they're actually quite comfortable on the hand. So they're add a lot of really cool and intriguing texture to a bouquet. And if you follow my videos, you know I'm all about not just the bold, bright colors, but also about texture to create that really, to take in another sense other than just the visual and the scent, but now you've also got the visceral where you really want to touch it. So you're involving more with the bouquet, the person who's looking at it. There's so much more if it's not just the smell and just the visual. If you also have that desire to touch the bouquet, that's going to make the person want to reach in and take out the bouquet when they have that desire to want to touch it. So that's what the pine needles really, really add to the bouquet. Now, the third foliage that we get from off the property is the Princeton gold maple tree, or maple leaves. And it's a beautiful, in the spring, a beautiful gold leaf. As the season progresses into the summer, it becomes less gold, more lime, and the leaves get bigger. They can get to a point where they're very big and awkward to use in the bouquet, and they also, where the tree that we have access to doesn't get watered, so they're really only useful to me in a bouquet in the spring when the branches of the leaves still look lush and happy. As we get out of our rainy season and into the dry season, the tree branches don't look so good anymore, and I can't really use them. But that's okay because the leaves actually start to get too big. So here again, it's something that I use in the spring bouquets, and in this particular bouquet, I've got it paired with a peony. I don't remember the name of that one. I'll put it up on the screen. It's an Itoh peony. You can see in the back I've got some more long needled pine. I've got one branch of the kale, but you don't actually see the yellow flowers on that kale, but you do see the seed pods from it, which adds its own little visceral texture to it. There's some dried astilbe in there because in the spring I will use my dried astilbe from the previous year to help create more texture into the bouquet. And then of course I've got an excuse me, an allium poking up high in this bouquet. So those are the three foliage plants that I get from off property, and all three of them I only use in the beginning of the season because all three of them don't get watered on a consistent basis. So all three of them are not useful to me in the summer. They are very useful to me when it's still raining outside. They're extremely useful when my camellia is blooming. And of course, I can carry through them through the peony season, all through the month of May, often in the month of June, but after that, not at all. However, I don't want to use them if I don't have to, again, because they require getting in the car and driving to where they are growing, cutting them, socializing. Not that there's anything wrong with socializing, but if you want to take the time into account for when you cut them, you have to factor that in. And then bringing them back home and then cutting them to the right lengths, etc., and getting them ready for when you want to use them. And that's very time consuming, and that isn't time efficient for me to do that. So necessary in the beginning of the spring because my tiny urban flower farm is on a city lot, which is only barely 1/8 of an acre, which of course includes our house, driveway, garages, and all that stuff. There's no room to grow trees on our property, even if I wanted to. And I've got pretty much every growable space maxed out. So to add more foliage onto that space, I don't want to do. I don't mind doing it off property to get this foliage in the spring, because again, you can tie it in with socializing and a few other things at the same time. But I don't want to have to consistently do that throughout the season all the way through to November. So for that reason, last year, for the first time, I thought all the runners from my neighbor's snowberry bushes, I say bushes because the bush just gets bigger and bigger and bigger with runners with each passing year. It's quite a huge mass of snowberry right now. And the runners come underneath the fence and into our property. And up until last year, I was diligently pulling them up and cutting them back so that they wouldn't take over in my garden. But I decided last year that I really, really enjoyed the look of the foliage. So I'll put it up here. You can see it comes in really long, straight stems. And the leaves are kind of paired on it quite delicately. So it's a completely different look of a leaf to use in a bouquet. And I tested it, and it works good in bouquets. So I thought, I'm not pulling them up this year. Well, I'm pulling up some because otherwise they'd come up everywhere. I'm not pulling them up in a certain area, and I'm going to use those in my bouquets so that I don't have to go off property to cut foliage from the 3 previous trees that I was referring to. And I use them in the bouquets, and I say the word absolutely a lot. I need to change that word. I really, really liked it. So you can see here again, I'm showcasing another bouquet that has... Did I show this one already? Oh, I'm doubling up on the same bouquet. Sorry about that. It's not usually like me. I usually make sure I'm not doubling up on the same bouquet in a video. But anyway, it's the same bouquet that I showed the last time, which has the long needle pine down below, the Bartzella, Itoh peony, which is the yellow one, the other peony below in the pale pink, the sand cherry branches, the kale flowers, which are the yellow flowers, the large allium, which is the purple ball, and then the snowberry branches just off to the side of it with their little pairing of little green leaves. And that adds airiness to the bouquet, whereas the sand cherry, the pine, and the Princeton gold maple do not. They're quite closed in. They don't give that airiness that I like to have in a bouquet. Aside from the texture, I like to have airiness. And so the snowberry branches really give that airiness so that it allows light and air to travel through the bouquet as well. And I really enjoyed using those, and I'm happy that I decided not to pull up the shoots this past year and use them. So that is my 4th foliage. But if you want to know what the snowberries look like in the winter when there is no foliage on them, and when the white berries, which I keep talking about how much I love using the bouquets as well for like a filler flower, which is in September. If you want to know what the snowberries look like in the winter, check this out. So before we get on to the next one, I thought that I would decide that this is a really, really good time to ask you all to hit the like button down below if you've been enjoying this video so far. And now we'll get on to the next foliage that I use in my bouquets. And that is another one that I tried for the first time this past year, and that is parsley. Now, it's kind of a cheat because I don't use the parsley for the foliage. I wait till they go up and create their umbels, which is the flower head, which is green. I use it like foliage. It isn't really much of a flower per se, but it does add really cool textural foliage to the bouquet. And I really enjoyed using it a lot, and I used it as much as I could. I had quite a bit of it because parsley kind of just sort of helps itself to the areas where I grow sunflowers, but it doesn't interfere with the sunflowers. It almost acts like a ground cover to them. So I was pretty happy to just let the parsley grow and put out its umbels and potentially go to seed so that I have lots more again for the following year. And as you can see in this bouquet, I've got snowberry branches kind of curving off to one side, and then I've got parsley umbels kind of curving off to the other side. It really does give a look of foliage and not flower. So that's why I consider it one of my top 10 foliage that I use in bouquets. Now, I've got it paired here with ranunculus. You can see there's a amandine blush, I think is what it's called. Is it blush? If it's not blush, I'll put it up on the screen. And then there's a white, there's another blush, and there's another white. There's black button bachelor buttons. There is an atropurpureum allium up high, and then a globemaster allium down low. There's also some laurel leaves collaring around the base of the bouquet. But yeah, parsley umbels ended up for me to be a really interesting I didn't fall in love with it the way I fell in love with the snowberry branches, which I absolutely find to be one of the most beautiful things to use in a bouquet for foliage. But the parsley umbels really weren't that far behind it. And maybe if I had more of them and could have used more of them, I would have been as in love with it as I was with the snowberry branches, which are never ending because those shoots come under the fence and they keep trying to grow, and they're always there. Always, always there unless you get the roots up. And so then the next foliage that I'm using is also one that you could say isn't really a foliage, but I'm calling a foliage, and that's poppy pods. So as you can see in this picture, the poppy pods, the poppies grow up, they create the flowers. You've got 3 different flowers here. You've got the red one down below. They're all breadseed poppies. The 2 top ones are peony breadseed poppies. And they're just natural crosses between a regular breadseed poppy and a pink peony poppy. And they've sort of, through bees, done some cross-pollinations, and these have popped up in some different shades between the pink and the red. You can see one that's just starting to open just off to the side. It's got the green head that's just cracking with a little bit of pink inside, which I think is kind of cool. And then off to the side, you can see what they look like once the poppies are finished, and you're just left with the poppy pod and the crown on top. Those are beautiful in bouquets. They add a lot of architectural interest to a bouquet, different from the soft, textural, unique and interesting textures. Well, textural is that unique and interesting textures to the bouquet. The poppy pod doesn't add a unique and interesting texture. As you can see in this bouquet, it adds drama, it adds structure with its solid pod, and then its little tiny crown at the top. That little tiny crown gives it just a little bit of whimsy, which I really like. So the poppy pods, as long as they're producing, I use them all. Sometimes they start to go dry before I've used them, depending on how many have grown for the year, because birds do eat a lot of poppy seeds. So I never really know how many poppies I'm going to actually get growing. I do throw some seeds out that I have saved, but even then birds get them too. We are on a migratory path, so in the spring and the autumn, we have a lot of birds in our yard feasting as they travel north or south, depending on whether it's autumn or spring. And then just through the course of the season, we have lots of birds as well. So poppy seeds get eaten a lot. So the poppy pods are really, really cool in a bouquet because of, like what I said, they add that really cool architectural structure to an otherwise small and simple plant stem. And here I've got it paired with a Wanda's Aurora, which is the large dinner plate dahlia that you see there. There's some white light sunflowers. There is some purple marjoram at the top, and of course laurel leaves around the bottom. So next up on my list is, of course, laurel leaves. We all know how much I love laurel leaves. Is that right? Is that laurel leaves that I'm talking about? Oh no, sorry, I'm not talking about laurel leaves yet. Ignore that. Clearly I'm going to talk about them. We all know I love my laurel leaves. This is actually, I'm still onto the poppy pods here. So when the poppy pods dry, you can see in this bouquet was taken in October 8th. And the poppy pods that are left are obviously completely dried up because they go green in, when was the last bouquet? What, was that in July? I'm going to assume it was July. Let me just double check. Oh, that was August 11th. So they would have been I would have been getting poppy pods in July as well. So those were probably later ones. But now we're into October, and the poppy pods will have completely dried on the plant, and then I've cut them and stored them to use now. And I've got them paired with a stilbe, which is also browned because it's more of a late spring, early summer flower. And the stilbe gives that brown, interesting texture, and the poppy pod, almost the same color, a little bit paler, gives that architectural interest again. So poppy pods are good, not just when they're fresh green. They're good in the fall for adding in some interesting texture when you don't have a lot of other things blooming, but they're also good in the early spring as a dried plant to use in bouquets, again, for that interesting texture. Now I've got it paired here with a Spartacus dinner plate dahlia, which is the large red one. There's some Rose Bonbon Cosmos. I can see some Costa Silver Snapdragon. I can see a Yarra Falls dinner plate dahlia off to the side. I think on my screen it's actually off to this side. And it's much the same red as the Spartacus, but you can see it's got the white tips to the flower. And then there is, of course, a few sunflowers in there as well. So what is it that we're going to talk about next? Well, next we're going to talk about, again, if you're enjoying my channel, please consider subscribing to it. I really, really appreciate it. And for those of you who have already subscribed, you don't know how much that means to me. It means a lot. It allows me to want to continue filming because it means that I know that people are actually enjoying my videos. So again, thank you very much to all of you who have subscribed. And if you haven't, please consider doing so. Now, let's get back on to the video. We are now going to talk about Cosmo foliage, which I love using. In fact, I grew Cosmos specifically for their foliage. Now, to make the foliage look good, you have to deadhead the Cosmos through the course of the summer season. And then the stems get thicker, and the little spiky foliage on it gets thicker as well, and denser. So you end up with really beautiful spiky texture, and they're like the pine needles, except of course much shorter. And I did use them as flowers this year, but mainly I have grown them up to this year just for the foliage. So as you can see in this bouquet, you can see the Cosmos up top. I've got the Rose Bonbon Double Click and the Snow Puff, we'll call it Snow Puff, Snow something, Double Click Cosmos. But you can see their little spiky green foliage traveling throughout the bouquet, which again makes you just want to reach out and touch it, which from a customer's point of view will make them want to reach in and pick up the bouquet and look at it. You can get your customer to pick up your bouquet. That's, that's 9/10 of the battle, if it's a battle. Anyway, in this bouquet, I also have an AC Ben, which is the large orange dinner plate dahlia. I have a white light sunflower down low, and up high, I have Costa Silver Snapdragons. I mentioned the Cosmos, and of course there's a ring of Laurel leaves down around the base of this bouquet. Now this bouquet here, you can also see how the Cosmo foliage texture adds a lot to a bouquet, because this bouquet is quite tight. But that one stem of the Cosmo foliage that doesn't have a flower on it, that's poking up the top, gives that airiness again, and that real I want to touch it kind of sensation to it. So Cosmo foliage is definitely one that I use a lot of. We're now going to move on to the foliage that I can't live without, because it's a plant that grows and grows and grows and grows. I mean, you have to stay on top of it. I would never advise planting it. It is not planted on my property. It's planted on my neighbor's property, just on the other side of our fence. It doesn't stop growing. I keep it pruned, and I use all the prunings all summer and all fall, and it is Laurel. If I wasn't using all the laurel branches that I prune in my bouquets, it would be driving me crazy for how much I have to trim it back to keep it from overtaking. My neighbor allows me to trim it because she doesn't want to do it. It's so much work, but it's so useful, and it's right there on the other side of the fence. Before I was doing bouquets, because we've lived on this property long before I had my roadside flower wagon, I was kind of annoyed at how much work that laurel hedge was to keep prune from growing up and over the fence and too tall. But once I started doing the bouquets, I realized, it's all perspective, how valuable it was to have that plant there, because I cut on it nonstop, and there was always more to cut because of how fast it grows. So as you can see here in this bouquet, I've got it paired again with another AC Ben dinner plate dahlia, which is the large one, white light sunflowers. I've got borage coming out the top, and then those beautiful, shiny, glossy green leaves of the laurel. It just, it adds so much to the bouquets, and it's so plentiful, and it's just like right there, and yet not on my property. So very, very happy to have been able to use all the prunings from the laurel bush. And yeah, it's almost like, yay, it's there. Because otherwise I wouldn't have enough foliage for, there is a plant I have on my property that has similar foliage to the laurel, which we'll talk about next, I believe. But if I used as much of it as I use of the laurel, there would just be a stump in the ground. So we're going to now talk about that plant, and that is my Camellia. So you can see the size of my Camellia bush. It's not giant, but it's certainly not small. But if I used that up for foliage instead of the laurel, it wouldn't last me all summer at all. I would have cut it down to the base. So actually very, very happy for that laurel. But I also am very happy to have the Camellia leaves, because they are smaller in size. They look a lot like the laurel, but instead of being long and oblong, they're much shorter in length. Now, of course, the Camellia leaves themselves are an important part of my Camellia bouquets, as you can see here. In this particular bouquet, and neither of the Camellia bouquets that I've showed you in this video were from last year, because we had a cold snap that was highly unusual for us, way colder than we normally get. and it affected the buds on the camellia bush, and I wasn't able to use any camellia flowers this past year. But I know how to correct that, so that's not going to happen this year. And it probably won't anyway, because we have yet to go below -2 Celsius, and we're now in a warming pattern. So we are expected to actually finally, and thankfully, going to go down to, in theory, -5 in another week or so. And that would be good, because it does keep bugs at bay. As to whether that happens or not, I don't know. But -5 is nothing compared to the -17 Celsius that we had. And it's not even realistically all that cold. It's enough to put a little bit of a freeze onto the soil surface. But anyway, this bouquet is from the previous year. And as you can see, the camellia leaves are a very integral part of the camellia bouquets, along with the sand cherry branches. These particular sand cherry branches are quite different from the bouquet that I showed you before that had more leaf and less flower. These ones have more flower and less leaf. Interesting characteristics. But I also used there was, in the beginning of the season for the laurel hasn't really started growing at an intense rate yet. So I had pruned the laurel back to the fence line height the previous fall, so I didn't have a lot to cut from. So there was a point where I didn't really have enough laurel, and I went to my camellia bush to use in my bouquets, as you can see here with the large Globemaster Allium in the center, the Atropurpureum up top, the Salmon Ranunculus, the Amandine Dicyon Sulfide, which is the fuchsia anemone. I think that's a rose bonbon ranunculus off to the side. There's a couple more ranunculus up the top. You can see I've got the Parsley umbels. I've got a hair allium, which is the really freaky looking thing in there, and the camellia flowers, or not flowers, leaves around the base of this bouquet. You can see they're much shorter. They look a lot like the laurel, but they are much shorter. And this is because at the beginning of the season, like I said, I didn't have enough laurel to cut from. Not sure if I'm even going to have enough of it to cut from this spring, because by the end of my season for bouquets, which was mid-November, I had pretty much used, because laurels, you know, it's going to start slowing down as the fall rolls around like everything else, and I had pretty much used most of the stretches of growth that it had. So whether or not I have enough to get through the spring and not have to go back and use some of my camellia bush as well, we shall see. But the camellia leaves are very, very important to me for that reason. They take the place of the laurel when I don't have the laurel. So the 10th foliage that I have is one that I know that I have, and I have a lot of it, but I don't use it unless I absolutely need to use it. And that's my Itoh peony leaves. Here you can see what the leaves look like in the fall. They're beautiful. They get that beautiful fall tones of oranges or reds or browns to them. And they make a beautiful addition to a bouquet. And in the summer, when they're green, they make just as good an addition to the bouquet because of their beautiful leaf structure. However, because my peonies are just entering their 4th year this summer, I only use the leaves if I absolutely have to, so that they can pull in as much energy to the plant as possible, so that I will get as many flowers as possible for the following summer. Once they are at a stage where they're really, really mature, and I'm getting my up to 50 flowers per plant, then I can certainly afford to use the leaves in the bouquets. I can afford to use a few leaves in the bouquets now or last year, but only if I have to, only if I find that it's necessary, or if it's a custom bouquet. So I didn't actually use any of the Itoh peony leaves last year. I did use some the year before. And nice to know that I have them as a backup if I need them, because there is lots of them. I do have 8 Itoh peony plants as well as 6 regular peonies, and they do put out a lot of foliage. But again, that is sort of a foliage in the bank for if I need it, but if I don't need it, I'm not going to use it. So those are the 10 foliages that I absolutely must have in my... In fact, those are the only 10 that I use. There isn't any additional foliage that gets used in any of my bouquets other than the 10 that I've just gone over. If you want to know what my top 10 filler flowers are, you should really check out this video here. See you next week. Bye.